Hello everybody and welcome back to another week in review, this time of 14th Infantry suggested by Pro Dukes and 7th Mechanized Corps suggested by Ben Schweitzer. If you're wondering why these are broken up, it's because Pro Dukes suggested I do 6th Airborne as well, which I did in my first week in review, so I kind of skipped over that one and grabbed a solo allied division from later on in the comments, so I'm not skipping anybody, just grabbing what I can. Before we hop right into the video, I hope everybody had an enjoyable holiday, as this video should be launching right after most of the holidays were celebrated. But without further ado, let's jump right in with my first look at 7th Mechanized. Jumping right into the Recon tab, I again used my typical strategy of bringing in as many Resvedka as I could, bringing in one card in Phase A and one card in Phase B, both coming in the Studebaker. I also have a Phase A card of the T-34-76 Resvedka. I'm not entirely positive what this was doing for me other than adding additional medium tank support, but maybe that was all I was using it for. In the Infantry tab, I bring in a Phase A card of Strelki and a Phase A card of Strelki SVT, as well as a Phase A card of Tanko Desetniki coming in the M2A1 half-track transport. I do the Tanko in this deck in Phase A simply because I only have 6 of the half-tracks available to me, and I really like bringing the Tanko in the half-tracks. For 10 points, bringing them up to 30 points, I think the Tanko are honestly a 30-point unit by themselves. And add on top of that you get a transport with a Dushka mounted to the top, I think it's just a really great option. Moving on, in Phase B, I bring in 2 cards of the Strelki DP, and in Phase C, I also bring in a card of the Strelki DP. This is kind of just to solidify that late game spam, but I was also running out of cheap infantry somewhere in the mid game, so I really wanted to stop that from happening. In Phase A in the tank tab, I bring in the Su-76I as well as the T-34-76 Komroti. In Phase B, I'm bringing in the T-34-76 OBR-1943 and the KV-1S Komroti, and in Phase C, I round it all out with the T-34-76 OBR-1943s. Overall, the tank tab was mainly meant as sort of a spammy infantry support, take out panzers at close quarters, and help my infantry push into cities or through cities, as well as the command tanks were being used mostly to support my ISU-122s. In the support tab, I have the Ognamachiki coming in at 1 star in the WLA motorbikes. I bring them in at 1 star because there's a shortage of WLA motorbikes in this division, so if you bring them in at no stars, as I typically do, you won't be able to bring in the PTRS 41s at no stars also, so I kind of just splurged a little bit on the PTRSs and skimped out on the Ognamachiki. I then bring in a card of the SG-43s and a Phase A Combat. In Phase B, I bring in the 52P 353 76.2mm infantry gun, which are just excellent options for really anything, and round out that tab also with the Dushka at 8 per card at no stars. Last thing I bring in is my Phase B supply truck card. In the anti-tank tab, I bring in the aforementioned PTRS 41s in the WLA motorbike, the M42 45mm in the DZHIP, or as I've recently been told, are called Jeeps. Weird, I know. I also bring in a Phase A card of the ISU-122S and a Phase C card of the ISU-122S. I was treating these as kind of my super heavies in this division, even though they're really not, and that's kind of a dangerous mindset to view the 122 in. The 122 is deceptively squishy and impressively bad at killing things, as far as super heavy tanks are concerned. I also bring in a Phase B card of the Ziz 3s. Now, the anti-tank tab in this division, despite having access to some of the better anti-tank options on this side, is very limited in the amount of cards that you're able to bring in. Things stack up and get very expensive very quickly when you're playing 7th Mechanized, especially in the anti-tank tab, and you always feel like you want one more thing from it. So don't be surprised if you're making this division and you feel a little lackluster in that department. In the anti-air tab, I bring in a Phase A and Phase C card of the Zenart 37mm, both of them coming in the Dushka transport, just so I could get that extra Dushka to do something Dushka. For 10 points, I feel like it's worth it, even if it only suppresses 1 infantry squad each time. On top of that, it adds a little bit of extra annoyance toward enemy aircraft, and sometimes I'm even lucky enough to make these guys take the shells that are meant for the Zenarts, as the enemy isn't sure which AA piece is which. I also bring in a Phase B card of my favorite allied AA gun, and that's the M15. These guys are just excellent deterrents toward enemy aircraft, they're excellent at killing enemy aircraft, and they're mobile as all hell, so they usually avoid the counter battery. Moving on to the artillery tab, I have a Phase A card of the F-22 76.2mm, a Phase A KV-1E 203mm off-map observer, which I was using to get those early footholds, believe it or not, a Phase B card of the F-22 76.2mm, and a artillery commander coming in Phase C at 1 star. I'll get into why this artillery tab looked so odd after I get done with the after the week was over deck. In the air tab, I bring in the PE2 Tech 83 in Phase B and 2 cards of the PE2 Tech 83s in Phase C. Now these are all of different munition types, however, again, I really don't care what they drop. The PE2 is such a bomber that it drops munitions, it kills whatever you drop it on, it doesn't matter what the size of the bombs are. Moving on to my deck at the end of the week, not terribly much changed, honestly. I found that I was quite happy with the division that I created in the first place, other than the fact that I swapped the ZSU M15 and the Zenart 37 mils in phases A and B respectively. The reason I did this is because the Zenarts in phase A were having a lot of trouble of keeping up with the 122 if I was able to get an early kill on something. In one game I was able to kill a King Tiger with the 122, I pushed forward and then was promptly bombed to death because my Zenarts weren't keeping up with the advance, so I really wanted to solve that more than anything else. My thinking for the artillery tab was actually a bit odd. I wasn't using the F-22s as a artillery gun mainly. I did typically use them as that throughout the game, however I was using them as anti-tank guns as I felt I had a shortage of them in the actual anti-tank tab. While the F-22 isn't going to win any awards for its anti-tank capacity, it is basically just a watered down Ziz 3, so it was performing quite well in that role. It also did a great job of supporting my infantry, being that the HE is still excellent at that range. If I was to make any change to this, I think I would drop the Dushka from phase B. I love the Dushka as an idea and I would love to use it more as a weapon, however it is really expensive to bring in. At 40 points each, I could bring in something like an F-22 for 20 points more, or an SG-43 for 10 points less and get much more usability out of it, so I could see myself into dropping these. Especially being that they were coming in the same phase as the 52P 353 76.2mm infantry guns, I could see my way into dropping these and I don't think I would be missing anything. However, I don't think that there was anything really worth taking in this tab, other than additional supplies if you were really into using artillery, which I'm just not. I could also see into bringing another commander, but you know, the combat is usually tanky enough that it doesn't come up often that I need to bring in another one. The Su-76I in the tank tab was really one of the standout units in this division. Being that I only got 4 of them, I could see my way into dropping these to phase B just to bring in a few more of them, but being that they pack the Ziz 3, they're devastating to infantry. And you know what, they do a decent job at killing medium or light tanks. I feel like having played recently 358th in my last week in review, this is a huge step up. This division is much more well-rounded, has a lot more going on with it, and allows you to do much more throughout the game than 358th otherwise would. For starters, it gives you the option of killing aircraft, which is quite fun, and the KV-1E 203mm off-map observer is actually a really good unit to have in phase A. Not only does it have those off-map rounds, but it also allows you to get a KV-1 in phase A, which is hardly a bad thing after you've used the off-map, that is. I feel like the 122S and the 122 in general is still kind of a lackluster unit for the amount of points that it costs to bring in. At 130 points, it purports to be only 10 points worse than the Jagdpanther, but I can tell you for a fact that it is much worse than the Jagdpanther. While it does do 12 damage, and so it will kill any tank upon penetration, it doesn't penetrate all that often. It has a fairly low accuracy for its point cost, and it is squishier than hell, as I mentioned earlier. Occasionally I'll forget what it's meant to be used for and kind of leave it out there to box with a tiger or a panther or something like that and end up just losing that brawl, which is always unexpected, although it makes sense having looked at the stats. It's just in the moment you think that it's a god unit and it's just not. I think that where this deck really shines is in a support role, so it's going to be intrinsically more valuable the more players there are in a game. All of its units are excellent for their points, but none of them are specialized enough to really take care of a situation by themselves, if that makes sense. Your infantry are great, being that they're Strelky, Strelky SVT, and Strelky DP. However, they're not going to beat Panzer Grenadier for the most part. Your tanks are decent, but being that they're T-34-76s, are oftentimes just going to lose to Stugs or Panzer IVs or even Panzer IIIs for that matter. And I've already mentioned how the 122 fares against Tigers at 2 kilometers, so it's not like those are going to win you any awards either. However, they will kill the Tiger more consistently than most other units, so I can't really blame them too much for what they do. You have excellent AA, and your artillery tab is decent at best. Your air tab is excellent for what it's worth. This division really does feature some of the better air tabs in the game, being that it just gets access to 3 cars of the BE2s rather than just the typical 2. On top of all this, you get the SG-43, the Dushka, and the 52P in the support tab, which are all fantastic at supporting your infantry. So your infantry do win engagements so long as they're being adequately supported. All this is to say that I think that in 1v1s this division could really struggle, though I'm not entirely positive, but I did find through actual evidence that in 2v2s and 3v3s it struggled much more than in 4v4s. If I was able to have another player on the front lines taking the brunt of the damage and just supporting that player, I found that we really did well together. This deck synergizes incredibly with other divisions, especially with IS-2 divisions. If you have an IS-2 that's capable of taking the shots, then the 122s are able to clean up from side armor or even just assist the IS-2s in front armor, while your infantry are just kind of meat shields for that IS-2. All that is to say, if you're looking for a division that you can easily use in team games, I don't think that this is the one, as it requires a lot of synergy that you might otherwise not have if you're not playing with a person that you actually know and speak to in comms. However, this deck is fantastic at defending itself. It's fantastic at existing in its own merits, if not pushing out of those merits, and it's excellent at its panic button usage. What I mean by this is the PE2s that you get access to in abundance and are relatively inexpensive while being fantastic planes are just excellent panic buttons. 1 or 2 of these will stymie most any advance if the enemy is not being careful. On top of that, the abundance of Strelky DP and Strelky with the SVT are going to really put down some hurt on advancing enemy infantry if they're also not being careful. In this division, I found that it was best to take the Rezvedka, immediately turn off the SVT, and lay them around in wait as bazooka teams, just to try and take out Panzer IVs before they got into engagement range, or, if I got really lucky, to take out King Tigers. Honestly, same as I thought last week with 358th, I think that this deck suffers from the "it's almost like 184th but worse" syndrome. If you're looking to use the 122, 184th is just a better division for you than any of the other 122 divisions, unfortunately speaking. I would love for there to be variations among these, as it would be very interesting to play different divisions. However, 184th is just a better version of each of these other divisions, especially if you're talking about the 122s. You get 3 cards of 122s, a better support tab, a better artillery tab, a better air tab, and a better infantry tab. And so the reality is that if you're going to play one of these divisions, just play 184th. Moving on to my first iteration of 14th Infantry. Now, this is the first time I've played 14th Infantry in a long while, and I'm not entirely positive why. It's not like I hate the division, I just don't play it all that often. Jumping right into it, I didn't bring in anything in the Recon tab as there was nothing interesting to bring in. The Aufklauer don't come in the SPW 222. The Recon tab is completely devoid of any interesting 20mm guns or anything like that, so I just decided to skip it and save the points. In the Infantry tab, I bring in a Phase A card of the Erzatstruppen and a Phase A card of the Stostrup MP44 coming in the Horse Transport. I also bring in the Grenadierführer in Phase A as well as the Big Light Pioneer to kind of back up all of those other units. I know that realistically I should not bring in the Big Light Pioneer as 3 per card, 40 points per unit. They're not fantastic units, so on and so forth. So really, I would be better off as a realistic player to skip out on the Big Light Pioneer. However, I can't do it. I love the Big Light Pioneer so much. The Big Light Pioneer always pay for themselves and their friends' friends. Moreover, it's really a joy to watch them work, and I just really enjoy using them as units, so I'm just not going to stop using them. In Phase B, I bring in the Grenadier DP, as well as the Pioneer SVT, just to get SVTs on the map, as well as Big Light Grenadier that are coming in the half-track transport, bringing them up to 40 points. In Phase C, I have the Grenadier DP coming in just to round it all out. In the tank tab, I bring in a Phase A card of the Lukes at 1 star, a Phase A card of Tigeries at no star, a Phase B card of Stug 3s coming in at 1 star, a Phase B card of Tigery Führers, and a Phase C card of no star Tigers. In the support tab, I was bringing in the Flammenwaffe on the BMW motorbike, a Phase A card of the Ersatz MG, a Phase A IG-290R, a Phase A Commandant, a Phase B supply truck, and a Phase B IG-33. Kinda hustling through these choices, but I'll get to why here in a bit. In the anti-tank tab, I brought in a Phase A card of the PZB-39s, kind of like PTRS teams in the BMW motorbike. I was using these just like PTRS teams, and at 5 points each, you could spend 40 points at the beginning of a match and just maybe they get a kill, maybe they don't, but it really didn't matter. I also brought in a Phase A card of the Panzerschrecks at 1 star, just because I was running out of motorbikes, so I had to drop one of them per this card, so whatever. I also brought in the M42 and Pack 40 in Phase A, and a Phase B card of the Pack 40 as well. In the anti-air tab, which was one of the more disappointing parts of this division, I brought in the Flakwerlung in Phases B and C, 4 and 6 per card respectively, but this almost wasn't enough in a lot of instances, so we'll get into that later. In the artillery tab, I brought in the 105s in Phase A, which I've fallen in love with these 105s. I absolutely adore the way they work. They're fantastic units, and if somebody else is getting a radio up on the front, or you're getting a radio up on the front, you're able to just snipe out a lot of enemy anti-aircraft weapons or enemy mortars, and it's just fantastic. I also brought in a Phase A card of the 210mm off-map observer, a Phase C card of the battery Führer, and a Phase C card of the 150s, which are really just there to round it all out should we get into a good old-fashioned Phase F game. In the air tab, I thought best to bring in the Cluster Bomber in Phase A to try and capitalize on enemy not having their anti-aircraft weapons in the correct spots, a Phase B card of the Super Napalm Bombers, which are really fun to watch but really ineffective if you get down to it, and in Phase C, 2 cards of the Ju-88 STAC-1 bombers with bombs in them. These are just typical bombers. They might as well be the same as the PE-2s, if a little less resilient and a little bit quicker. Moving on to my deck at the end of the week, I made a few changes, as you can see. Some of them are interesting. So I found that the Stahlstrup coming into the Horsch were practically the same as the Flammenwerfers. So I kind of dropped the Flammenwerfer and just used the Stahlstrup instead as my flame troops. For some reason, it hadn't occurred to me that the Horsch traveled just as quickly as the BMW motorbike, so I really didn't lose anything by swapping to this strategy. This dropping of the Flammenwerfer allowed me to pick up the IG-18, and I also swapped out the Ersatz MG for MG-42s because I got really tired of my support guns running away all the time. In the infantry tab, I did the wise thing and dropped the card of Phase B Big Light Grenadier for a Phase C card of Grenadier, as weirdly enough, first time I played this division, I ran out of infantry, and it was absolutely embarrassing being that I was playing an infantry division. In the anti-tank tab, I dropped the card of PZB-39s because they are pointless. They're beyond pointless. They're slower than enemy PTRS teams, and because of that, they oftentimes don't get into position fast enough to snipe out more than a single transport, and so they were kind of just 40 points wasted at the beginning of every game. I swapped them out for the Ziz-3 coming in Phase B just to try and give me some more AT coverage, and a Phase C card of the Pack 40s to continue in that vein. That was really all the changes that I made. I made a few changes throughout the week to the air tab, but I ended up settling on the same thing that I had started with unintentionally. I find that this division is quite bizarre. It's one of those divisions that, as an infantry division, includes enough things to make it completely viable in mid-range or long-ranged engagements, being that it has the Tiger, the Pack 40, and a lot of really good infantry guns. Aside from all that, though, your infantry all still specialize in close quarters, be it the Big Light Pioneer, the Big Light Grenadier, the Stahlstrup, so on. Honest to God, my entire kingdom I would trade for 1 card of Panzer IVs in this division, as I think that would really turn this from being a mediocre division at best to one of the better divisions in the game. Something that it really struggles from is the lack of medium tank support in close range. The Panzer II Lukes is excellent at pinning down infantry, but completely sucks at killing enemy vehicles. What's more, you have the other option of the Stug 3, which is hull locked and so not great in close ranged engagements, and the Tiger E, which I feel wasteful using in close ranged engagements. Especially because the close ranged engagements that I'm always talking about are ones that are fraught with bazooka teams or such not, and so the Tiger is going to be more of a liability than it is a boon. All that aside, I fiddled with a few different options for the AA tab and for the air tab, just trying to get a few more kills on enemy aircraft, but I found that my best option for killing enemy aircraft was to push hard enough that there weren't enemy aircraft. The Flak Whirling is excellent at killing aircraft, but being that you only have a select few of them and they're very expensive, they're not going to get as many kills as you otherwise would like. Your other options in this tab are a motorized Flak 38 and stationary Flak 38s, and the Flak 38 is practically worthless in my hands. I think it's a pointless unit, so I just don't trust it to bring it in. I was for a little while bringing in the Flak 38 on the motorized vehicle and using it as an infantry support cannon, as it travels really quickly, just driving it up with my Stostrup, for example, and then using it to pin down enemy transports, but this was oftentimes just a waste of points also, as they didn't kill as much as I'd like. The anti-tank tab in this deck got a huge workout. Being that I was oftentimes fighting in these mid-ranged engagements, I find myself fighting against France or America most often and just being harried by Shermans. Because of this, the Pac 40, the Ziz 3, and the Panzerschreck teams really got a workout in trying to kill all these Shermans. I feel like if I had to describe this deck as something, I would describe it as if 78 Sturm traded all of its long 88s for Tiger E's. It reminds me a lot of 78th Sturm, if a little worse in certain areas, but the areas where it does remind me of it mainly are the Infantry tab. The Beglite Pioneer are fantastic and I enjoy watching them work every time. On top of this, you get the best version of the Stostrup with the MP44 that come in the Horse Transport at 6 per card and at 1-star veterancy in Phase A. These are practically just Tanko Desetniki that are going to beat Tanko Desetniki most of the time. Not in that 100-meter engagement, but because of the MP44, they're not limited to a 100-meter engagement either. The Ersatz-Truppen do an excellent job of providing just flesh for a flesh wall in front of my more important units, or just running away consistently and causing the enemy to panic and fire artillery at them. And then we come to the support tab. This is a fantastic support tab. It gets access to all the greats, such as the MG42, the Ersatz MG if you wanted to go that route, the IG-290, the IG-18, and the IG-33. And on top of all this, the support tab is incredibly large and incredibly cheap. If you're playing this division and you don't have at least 2 cards of infantry support guns, then you're just doing everything wrong. This division is fantastic for that. You're able to just pin down large swaths of land with these gigantic amounts of AT guns and anti-infantry guns that you just otherwise couldn't with other divisions, and I feel like that's really where this division sets itself apart on the Axis side. Where 7th Mechanized from this week was kind of really a jack of no trades, master of no trades also. This is kind of very specialized in taking open ground with very sparse bits of heavy cover, be it a city or forest. An excellent example of this is the city in Lenina, where you're able to utilize the Tigers, you're able to use the IG-18s from the hills as support guns, and you're able to use your fantastic infantry to push through the city. So you're really at no disadvantage here. Where it starts to fall apart is in, say, the forest at Lenina, where you're liable to go up against the Sherman horde and you just have no way of dealing with Shermans in close quarters, especially in abundance that might overrun your Panzerschreck teams. The best piece of advice I can give for this division is not to fall prey to bringing in all of your super units all at once. I know that there's a dark voice inside each of us, and especially within me, that tells me, well, granted, a Stug would be able to stop this Sherman, but I could bring up a Tiger. And then you waste all your points on a Tiger and then lose the city because you didn't have enough infantry in it. I think that's one of the biggest follies of this division, is that most of your super units are quite expensive, be it the Tiger, the Beglite Pioneer, or your super planes. Because of this, each time you solve a problem, you really have to weigh how big of a problem it is when bringing in these units. The Ju-88s are phenomenally slow and incredibly weak when it comes to enemy anti-aircraft fire. On top of this, the Ju-88 S-Tech-1s that you bring in phases A and B in my division only come in at 1 per card, and so you're not able to really spam them out there to cover one another with their bodies. so they oftentimes end up dying. If I was to make any change to this division, I would drop both of those, honestly. While the cluster bomber was usually worth its weight, the napalm bomber was only interesting enough to watch 1,000 trillion napalm bombs fall on enemy infantry lines, and then the plane would promptly go down right after that, oftentimes only getting 1 or 2 runs out of it. For 155 points, this is more or less worthless and ended up being a point sink more times than not for me. In a strange turn of events, I find that 14th is more useful the fewer players there are in the map. In a 4v4, I felt incredibly weak as I was less than helpful in a support role other than taking cities or forests. However, in a 2v2, being that I had so many incredible units that I could bring to bear on one front, and was able to micro all those units, being that I wasn't split up too much, it really does pay for itself. In fact, in the few 1v1s I've actually done, I've played 14th, and typically 14th overperforms in the 1v1 role, though that could just be the games that I was in. There are very few divisions, and by very few I mean almost none on either side, that are capable of bringing in a heavy tank that is actually great at what it does, as well as some of the best infantry in the game. The only division that is similar that I can think of off the top of my head is 26th Guard on the Allies side, and even that only brings in the KV-85s and the IS-1, of whom I have a long and varied history of hatred. All that said, this deck is actually a lot of fun and very easy to play. All of its units perform as advertised, and what I mean by that is, if you send Big Light Pioneer into a forest, it'll take Satan himself to come out of the ground to actually stop them from pushing through that forest. These guys will beat Tanko Desetniki at 2-to-1 odds so long as they're broken up and when they're fighting them. The Tiger E will outperform any allied tank that isn't named IS-2 or Sherman Jumbo, so there's that in your favor, and on top of all this, you have excellent anti-tank support and excellent artillery support in the form of the 105s and the 150s. As if that weren't enough, the JU-88s are oftentimes more than enough to just bomb something into oblivion should you make a slight misstep or you need an IS-2 dealt with in a hurry. All in all, I really enjoy this division, and I really enjoy all of the units that it can bring to bear. I just wish that it was capable of bringing in, say, Flak 38 transports to bring in the Flak-Wurlung, as I think that would really round this division out, or perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, the Panzer IVs. Even one card of those would go a long way toward helping this division really perform well in forested scenarios or in sort of dense city fighting that isn't on Lenina. All that said though, that is going to do it for this week in review. Next week we have 28th Jaeger and 3rd US Armored per the gods of chronological order. As a quick update, I am working hard on getting the 3v3 maps out to you guys also, as well as getting some actual gameplay videos, but being that I was on vacation, it's kind of all in a blur, so those might be a bit late. Thank you all so much for watching and making it to the end of this video, and as always, I hope you've learned something.